welcome back. So in this video, we are going to be talking about the other half of overall text manipulation. And in this case, we're going to be looking at different font properties. So in this video, we're going to be looking at three: font size, font weight, and font style. So first thing I want to look at is font size. So right now we have our pretty standard text here, right? So I'm just actually going to go ahead and erase our text transform from our previous video. So now we have our text here, and what I want to do is change the size of this. The only problem is I want to use a responsive design. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and first use our font size property, and then I'm going to go ahead and say, let's just say 1.25 EM. So what happens here is make this 25% more than the standard font size. Now you can see it's a little bit bigger, but it's not as big as doing something like 2 EM. So there we go. Now that we've done that, we can also go ahead and actually use pixel values if we wanted to, 40 pixels for example. The only problem is this is going to set everything consistently. So you can see all of the sizes are the same. It doesn't matter if they're a header or, well, it does actually matter, but because in the CSS defined code, all of these headers actually have 2 EM, but if we actually removed all of these, they would be the same. So using something like 2 EM would be great, because what actually happens is now everything stays consistent, and it's also a relative unit, so that's always good because it stays responsive. So there we go. That's pretty much it for font size. I'm going to go ahead and actually change this to 1.15 EM. I think that's good. So there we go. That's the first one. Now let's go ahead and talk about font weight. So this is a little bit more complicated. So pretty much what font weight decides is the bolding of a text or a font. So the values for this can range from 0, which is nothing, all the way to, well, pretty much infinity. The only problem is most fonts only support up to 800 or 900 because, again, for each value, there's a different bolding stage. So most fonts are only going to go up to maybe 800 or 900. Some of them can go even higher, but in theory, you can make these values as big as you want. The only problem is it's not really going to show any change if you make them very big. So there we go. That's pretty much it for font weight. Let's go ahead and start adding it to our website. So let's say I wanted to make our title a little bit bolded. So I'm going to go ahead and say font-weight. And now I'm going to go ahead and specify a value. Let's go ahead and start with 0 and see what happens. You can see that nothing actually happens, but pretty much like I said before, most fonts only support certain values. So for example, 100 would be a very specific kind of bolding, 200, 300, 400, and all the way up to as much as the font supports. Now, usually the convention for this is you're supposed to go up in hundreds from 100. That's kind of like the minimum supported font size. So if I go ahead and set 100 here, you can see it's very thin. And if I go ahead and set it as 800, which is usually the highest that you should go realistically, this is kind of the standard for H1s. So there you go. You can set it to something like 600, which isn't very commonly seen. Like I said, fonts only support certain boldedness, if that makes sense. But you can go ahead and play around with this. And like I said, depending on the font, it's going to change what the text actually looks like. So there we go. That's pretty much it for font weight. I'm going to go ahead and actually just set this to 400, which is the standard font right there. So 400 is the normal. It's like normal bolding, no bolding, and don't make it very thin. So that's kind of what it's the normal range. So there we go. That's it for font weight. Now let's go ahead and look at font style. So just like font size is for size and font weight is for bolding, font style is for italicizing. So I'm going to go ahead and actually italicize a small piece of text here. So let's just go ahead into this, and I'm going to take this first part and actually just cut it out. I'm going to create a span tag. So a span tag is sort of an, if you don't know, it's an inline it's an inline container tag, which allows you to contain certain pieces of text without, disrupting the flow or moving them onto their own line. So now I'm going to give it a class. I'm just going to say italics, I guess that would work. So then I'm going to go ahead and use the class selector, italics, open this up. Now we're going to go ahead and start working on adding our italicizing. So what you can do for this is called font style. And although most of the selectors these days are quite easy to remember, italics and font style don't usually go hand in hand, so it might be a little hard to remember this one. So there's 3 different values they can use for this. Normal, which is pretty much the same as setting the font weight as 400, doesn't do anything, or it actually, well, changes it back to its normal state. Then you have italic, which is to italicize it, and then you have oblique, which is a little bit more italicized. So let's go ahead and just add the basic one. I'm going to go ahead and type italic here. Now, if we refresh the page, you can see that where it is, there we go, it's right there, is a little bit more, the font is a little bit more italicized. So there we go. Now let's go ahead and set it as the other value, which is oblique. And you might notice a little bit of a difference. It's not immediately obvious, but it's actually just a little bit more italicized. So like I said, it's not very noticeable, but that's just one thing to keep in mind. So there we go. I'm just going to change this back to italic, and that's pretty much it for the 3 different font manipulation techniques. Now, although I didn't cover font family, which is what I'm going to cover in the next video, these are the pretty much 3 basic ones that you can use to work with text without changing the font itself. So you can go ahead and work with changing the font weight, make it bolded, italicized. You can also change the size. So you can really do a lot with this, but font family is a little bit more complicated, which is why I want to leave it for its own video. All right, let's move on.